In 1970 and 1971, there was a man running the streets of Bucharest that was cultivating horror throughout the city. The spree of murder, rape, the drinking of blood, the eating of flesh, and pedophilia led Romanian authorities to engage in a massive manhunt to find the culprit. This is the story of Ion Rimaru, the Vampire of Bucharest. The trouble started on the 12th of October 1946 in a small town in the Romanian countryside. The oldest of 3 children, Ion was born into a lower-class, abusive family. The daily beatings of Ion's mother continued until his mother could escape the situation. After the separation, and after Ion caused a massive scandal in his hometown by having a sexual relationship with a minor, Ion and his father relocated to Bucharest. Despite Ion's degeneracy, Ion still managed to get decent grades in school. Once Ion went to university, however, his grades became grim, and Ion was described as semi-literate by his professors. Ion's strange behavior hadn't been left in his old village, as his college roommates began to see his odd tendencies that would later become a massive red flag for the chaos to come. Ion was quick to anger, and when angered, he would usually begin cutting himself. His uncontrollable sexual desires were also revealed to his roommates when he stayed up all night outside of the room of a fellow student that had a girl visiting him. Eventually, the university doctors would diagnose Ion with a myriad of mental problems. Shocking, I know. On the 4th of April 1970, Ion caved to his most grisly desires and claimed the life of his first victim, a waitress called Elena Opria. Elena was stalked after leaving work and then struck with either a blunt object or a small axe as she entered her home. These blows killed her, but before Ion could carry out anything sicker than what he had already done, he was reportedly scared away by Elena's neighbor. Whether the neighbor knew Elena had been murdered, or just the noise scared Ion off, I could not find that information. The next crime didn't occur for another 2 months, but the crime on the night of June the 1st would earn Ion the name the Vampire of Bucharest. While walking home, Florița Marțu was knocked out with a blunt instrument in front of her house. Her body was then dragged into the nearby Sfânta Venerii cemetery. She was tossed over the fence and was subsequently raped and stabbed. During this pure madness, Ion started drinking the blood from some of Florița's wounds. Ion was unable to kill Florița as a passing truck driver intervened and got Florița to a hospital in time to save her life. On the 24th of July 1970, Margareta Haganu was robbed by Ion at knife point. There was a significant cooling off period until November 22nd when Olga Baraitaru was attacked, raped, and robbed by Ion. She lived, but her wounds were excessive enough to be considered an attempted murder. On February 15th of 1971, Ion savagely beat and then robbed a woman called Georgita Stefsu. The very next day, he almost killed a woman called Elizabeta Floria by beating her with an unknown weapon. March 4th, 1971, Frănița Ili was beaten, robbed, and raped by Ion, but she too ultimately survived the attack. On the 8th of April 1971, Ion's most horrific attack was carried out, and the people of Bucharest had enough. People were actually appealing to the feared Securitate for help in tracking down the Vampire of Bucharest. Georgita Papa was attacked in her home and was murdered, raped, and robbed. The murder was much more brutal than the previous ones. This incident, combined with the epidemic of violence that Ion was responsible for, was the last straw. The people were outraged when they heard the details of Papa's murder after finding out that Papa had been stabbed 48 times all over the body, had her skull and ribs crushed by Ion stomping on her, and even had her female region bitten off and eaten. The massive manhunt for the Vampire of Bucharest was on. At this point, the Bucharest authorities launched Operation Vulture, named after the street where Papa was murdered. 6,000 people from various Romanian law enforcement agencies were conducting nightly patrols in the streets of Bucharest, including over 100 car-based patrols and 40 motorcycle patrols. Many non-law enforcement people, including bar workers and medical professionals, were also deputized in a sense to be lookouts for anything suspicious. Ultimately, 2,565 people were arrested and 8,000 people were asked for ID, but none of those people was Ion. The MO for Ion given to the people of Operation Vulture was that the suspect was impulsive, sadistic, ferocious, and cruel, based on his propensity for cutting off clothes, biting off and eating flesh, dragging victims away, hacking at them with weapons, and raping them while unconscious or also when they were dead. Sadly, during Operation Vulture, Ion was still carrying out crimes which had to be embarrassing for the authorities. However, these patrols may have limited Ion's effectiveness. On the 1st of May 1971, Stana Sarachin suffered an attempted rape. On the 4th of May, 2 women were attacked in the same night. Mihaela Ursu was raped and murdered, but Ion was interrupted before he was fully satisfied. Ion then later attacked a woman named Maria with a metal bar, but she managed to run away after Ion dropped the bar in the melee. On the 6th of May, Viritsa Tatu was attacked by Ion but lived. On the 7th of May, Elena Bulitsi was attacked but not killed. That would be one of the last major crimes before Ion was captured. During Ion's attack on Mihaela Ursu, he made a fatal mistake. Somehow, Ion had left a slip of paper from the university's doctor's office at the scene of the crime. Ion's name was on that slip of paper. The police went to the student's hostel that Ion was staying in and arrested him. During a police lineup, Ion was identified by several of his victims. The Vampire of Bucharest had finally been captured. Once arrested, the police employed a common tactic to extract information from Ion. A police officer was placed in the same cell with Ion, acting as a fellow criminal. This added to the list of crimes that Ion was charged with, as he confessed several of them to the undercover officer. After 2 months of investigation and interrogation, Ion admitted to 23 serious crimes. His initial charges were only for 3 murders, but he later confessed to an additional murder, 6 attempted murders, 5 rapes, 1 attempted rape, and 7 major thefts. Ion made the insanity defense, claiming that he didn't think the people he attacked would die, despite the attacks being so vicious. Ion was convinced that he had the insanity defense in the bag until the sentence of death was read out to him. Clearly, the authorities were not buying this defense. On the 23rd of October 1971, justice was about to be dealt out to Ion. He was combative from the moment he was taken to the Jalava prison until he was dead. Ion was dragged out into an opening and then tied to a post. He was freaking out the whole time, trying to thrash about and biting at his clothes. Fortunately, this made Ion a harder target for the firing squad, so Ion's death wasn't quick, and he took many non-fatal gunshot wounds before he ultimately died. His last words were, "I want to live," something he never considered for his victims. Ion was buried in an unmarked grave in the Jalava cemetery, a fitting end for the Vampire of Bucharest. Strangely enough, Ion's father was a major player in this whole fiasco, since it was revealed that he knew of the crimes his son committed and was often coaxing Ion to do more. Ion's father took cash from one of Ion's robberies to buy a new home. The father also helped to clean the blood from Ion's clothes and hid some of the murder weapons for him. After many investigations surrounding Ion's crimes, it was found that Ion's father was also a serial killer, but he had remained at large until evidence in his son's investigations emerged. It was found that the father had killed 4 women in 1944 in the same manner that Ion murdered women. Fingerprints were collected, but no match was known until Ion's father's fingerprints were taken and compared. Ion's father and the unknown killer also had the same shoe size. Rather than having a trial, Ion's father was killed by, quote, falling off a train. This was ruled an accident, but most people believe this was an assassination by the Securitate, as this was a common tactic for them. Oddly, both men's first victims were named Elena, which led Romanian authorities to assume that there might be a genetic factor to the levels of violence these men engaged in. While vampires may not exist, monsters are still real, and this is evidenced by the life and crimes of Ion and his father. The Vampire of Bucharest was very real, and his story is more terrifying than any fiction. Thank you all very much for listening, and I will see you guys next time.